Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis, chapter 3, Halacha 4. Now, we were talking about removing rocks before, and if you have big boulders or big rocks in your field, you can't just remove it on the seventh year because that's really going to be the tolda of plowing. You're really getting the ground ready for a future growing. And, if you have cattle and you have a plow, you can't just run the plow over certain terrain where you have big rocks in the way because it'll block your progress. And, the land in Jerusalem is very hilly and it's very rocky. There's boulders all over the place. You just need to walk around the Jerusalem forest to see that. That's the natural landscape. So that's why in this part of the world, olive production, olive trees are so big as a food crop because you can plant them in a field and an orchard and you can have rocks all over the place, but you're not running a plow over it. You're walking and you have a team of people walking from tree to tree. So walking around a boulder is not a big deal, but in an area of land, you can still generate a large quantity of calories for a society, be it in olive oil and olives, things like that. But you have a problem in these kinds of fields where you have boulders. Now, if you want to grow wheat and barley and things like that, you have to have a big program of clearing out all these boulders. And so that's why this is going to be akin to plowing. Also, if you have boulders that are underneath the ground that are kind of half in and half out, you can't just run a plow over it. Now, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about where somebody's going to have a quarry of stones, and they're going to have a quarry so that they could make a rock pile for construction. And there's going to be a conversation about that because that's a little bit different category than just having, some rocks laying on top of the ground. And you want to clear that away so that you can, do a field that you can grow wheat on or something like that, something that you can create room for a plow to get around. The Mishnah starts off and it says, a person may not open a quarry initially in his field unless it has in it 3 exposed rows that are 3 amos by 3 amos by a height of 3 amos, and their measure being 27 stones. So this is actually kind of big. These stones, it's unclear, by the way, why these stones have to be cut to such a large height, because 3 amos, depending on how you're going to calculate it, it either comes up to the height of your shoulders or it's going to come up to the height of an average person. In other words, whether it's going to come up to the height of the shoulders or the actual height of the person, an average person, the only difference being the size of the head, really. That's a big pile of rocks. Now, there's going to be a lot of dispute on how this is supposed to be laid out. So one view is that you're going to have 3 rows, and you're going to have these rows where they are going to be these very long rocks. They're not going to be split up, and then you're basically going to have them get split up in 3 more rows along these 3. So you're going to get a total of 27 stones. There's another way to interpret this where you have these 3 rows, and then you have these 3 rows high, and the Rosh and the Rosh are holding that these 3 rows are going to total 87 or 81 stones, and the Rambam is holding that these 3 rows by 3 rows is going to come out to 27 stones, but that these 7 stones are just going to be 1 row where each of them is going to be smaller. So it's going to look like a Rubik's Cube, according to the Rambam. the difference between how Rav and the Mara Fulda are going to see this other one with 27 stones is that it's not like a Rubik's Cube. There are 27 stones, but they're not cut in half to make a middle stone. They stay lengthwise very, very long without cuts, and then you have 3 sets of stones behind them. In any case, these stones are very, very big, and we're talking about really big masses of solid rock where you have these stones are going to get cut, and this is going to be for building. This is not going to be for some agricultural use. This is going to be for trying to build stone. You go around Jerusalem and you see Jerusalem stone on all the building. And, a lot of times in a quarry, the rock is going to be embedded into the ground, and it's not necessarily going to be a mountain that's going above the ground. Sometimes you have that. That's very common with the pure white marble that exists in Italy. It's a mountain that's very high, and they cut right from the mountain. This is a little different. This is talking about rock that's actually embedded in the ground, and you're going to try to cut out stones that you need to expose, and you're going to dig away this earth, and you're going to expose this rock, and this exposing the rock is going to be referred to in the Mishnah as opening a quarry. That's the term. And the Mishnah is going to forbid doing this on Sheviis because people are going to think that he's intending to remove the rock to prepare for planting. Now, the Mishnah is teaching that it's forbidden also to cut and remove these stones from this quarry, and it's forbidden even to dig away the earth because people might suspect him of intending to remove the rock to cultivate the land. And certainly, if he actually does remove stones from the quarry, people would suspect him of committing this violation. So, removing the stones is forbidden. And the Mishnah is adding that even the digging that is as a preparation for removing the stones is going to be forbidden. That's going to be one of the ideas here. Now, the idea here, unless it has 3 exposed rows, that's going to be the trigger on this. In other words, if you already have enough rock that's already exposed so that you have 3 rows of stones with dimensions given, which would be cut from, the site is obvious that it's a rock quarry. It's obvious that it's not being done for plowing. And then if you're removing the stones from the site, people are not going to misunderstand what you're doing, and they're going to understand that you're doing this for building. You're not doing this for planting. You're not clearing the land for planting. And it's permitted. In other words, you're allowed, if you have this very, very large size rows, and they're very big, even up to the size of a person. That's the minimum. That's the minimum quantity, this minimum size of this. And basically, they're saying that you're allowed to clear the land, and you're also allowed to cut and remove the stones from it. That's what this Mishnah is saying. But again, this is a very big minimum quantity that's required. So the Mishnah is going to continue. It's going to say that the Mishnah now is going to talk about removing stones from a stone fence. In other words, you already have a stone fence there. So we were talking about a quarry. Now we're talking about other stones. And so the Mishnah says, if a fence has in it 10 stones, and each of which is a 2-man burden. In other words, that is that each one of these 10 stones is too heavy for one person to carry by himself, and you need 2 persons to carry it. The Mishnah says its stones may be taken. And the measure of a fence is 10 tefachim, and if it is less than this, it has the law of a quarry, and he may raise it to 1 tefach of the ground. So let's explain this. So the law in general is that if you have a wall has to at least be 10 tefachim high. That's everywhere in Jewish law. And the idea here is that if the wall is going to be less than 10 tefachim, or has less than 10 of these large stones, or the large stones are smaller than a load for 2 people, then what's going to happen is you can raise it to 1 tefach of the ground. And in the case of a quarry, where even the stones can be removed, and you have these very big 3 rows, and each of these rows is 3 by 3 by 3 amos, and that's exposed. There might be even more behind the rest of the earth. That's just what's open for everybody to see that it's a quarry. Basically, he must leave 1 tefach of stone at ground level so that the site remains unfit for cultivation. In other words, these stones, this is basically going to come up to your knees. This is basically going to be where, it's going to be 1 tefach above the ground. It's not going to come up to your knees. It's going to come up to something about to your ankle. And this kind of big, large stone, you can't run a plow over it. And you'll break your plow, and it makes it impossible. And that's the idea, is that at least 1 tefach of stone is at ground level, so that it's clear to everybody you can't use it for cultivation. Now, the Mishnah is trying to teach that when you have a wall that does not meet this minimum requirement, it assumes that the law of a quarry is in play. And basically is that he would split the stones in a bottom layer of a fence. And basically the idea is that the person's intention is to take these stones out and to go use it for building. Now we're going to get into the restrictions of taking stones from a quarry and from a wall on Sheviis. So the Mishnah says, in regard to what is this said, and it says in regard to removing stones from within his own field, but from within his fellow's field he may take what he wants. So the idea here, says Rav, is that people do not suspect someone of clearing another person's field for planting, and if a person a person may take stones from a quarry or a wall located in another person's field if the owner gives him permission, without any restriction whatsoever. Why? Because his neighbor might need those stones for building. He might need to, the Jerusalem stone is not very porous, and they use it for the face of buildings all the time, and it keeps out the rainwater. And so, this is not an arrangement where your fellow is helping him to prepare a field for a future year. He's needing this kind of stone because he's trying to, add to his house, or he's trying to put up more of this stone to protect his house. So this is not an agricultural need. In other words, there's an allowance here where it's actually going to be for building. Now, the Chazan Ish says about this that with this, there's going to be a second qualification. And the second qualification says, in regard to what is this said, when he did not begin it by the year preceding Sheviis. So the Chazan Ish says about this that if he did not remove stones from the wall, or digging away earth, or uncovering stones from the quarry before Sheviis, so that's going to be the idea. And the Mishnah is going to continue. It's going to say, if he began by the year preceding Sheviis, he may take what he wants. So the idea, this qualification, does not apply to the rules against taking stones that appear in the following halacha. The Chazan Ish says that since in those cases, the stones in the earlier cases in this Mishnah are not part of one structure that is being dismantled or excavated, people will not assume that the stones were taken on Sheviis, and that they're being taken for the same purpose as the stones that were taken before Sheviis. So that's going to be a clarification on it. And the Mara Fulda is going to explain a little differently. He's going to say that all of this means that one should not dig away earth to expose a quarry. And the Mishnah statement, says the Mara Fulda, is that it is permitted to expose a quarry only if 3 rows of it were already exposed. And that's going to be referring to where these rows became exposed by themselves. But if the person had exposed part of the quarry before Sheviis, then even if he exposed less than 3 rows, he may continue exposing it during Sheviis at the end of the Mishnah. That's as the end of the Mishnah teaches. So that's the insight on this by the Mara Fulda. And the Gemara is going to just jump in, and it says, how does this occur? In other words, it's talking about that it's permissible to start opening a quarry on Sheviis only if it contains 3 exposed rows that produce 27 stones. Again, these stones come up either to the size of a person's shoulder or head, and so they're very big. And the idea is that it's so big as this minimum quantity to get started with it that it's going to be obvious to everyone that you're not trying to clear this field of stones. You're doing it for perhaps selling the stones for quarry, and that's a pretty good business. So the Gemara asks, it says, how does it occur? How do these 3 rows produce 27 stones? And the Gemara asks, and it says 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. So the idea is that you have these 3 9-stone rows, and that would produce 27 stones. Okay, that's, by the way, following the interpretation of Rav. That's not the interpretation necessarily by the Rambam. The Rambam is going to understand this a little bit differently. He's going to be understanding it that a person may not open the quarry initially, and that's going to be different from this other approach that Rav has. And according to the Rambam, it does not mean that if one starts before Sheviis, he may continue on Sheviis without restriction. What the Rambam means is that the rabbis are forbidding someone to perform the initial removing of stones from a quarry. And as long as there's 3 rows containing 27 stones, that it's not been removed, it's going to be considered as this initial ruling. So the Rambam, by the way, is interpreting this Mishnah with that there's 2 qualifications, and in the 2 qualifications that there's you have one related to a fence, and the other one is related to a quarry. So that's the insight by the Rambam on this. But anyway, so you have over here these 3 9-stone rows. By the way, they come up to the size of a shoulder or a head for a person. And that's going to produce your 27 stones. Again, that's going to be in line with the Rav's interpretation of this. And the Mishnah is going to conclude that if someone started opening a quarry before Sheviis, he may continue to open it further on Sheviis, even if the 3 rows are not exposed. Now, the Bryce is going to explain about this, and it's going to say, it was taught in a Brisa, if a quarry is partially in his property and partially in his fellow's property, and his fellow opened it during a permitted time, that's going to be before Sheviis, he is permitted to open his half during Sheviis. But if his fellow's half of the quarry is empty and all the rock in it's been excavated before Sheviis, he is forbidden to open his half during Sheviis. So the idea is that because there's no rock left in his neighbor's portion of the land, and this quarry is half on his neighbor's land and half on his land, that people will not necessarily realize that there's a quarry in this other location, in your location, and people are going to basically suspect you of preparing the field to plant. So they're not going to realize that, your land has half the quarry. And so they're going to suspect you of trying to plant the field and trying to prepare this for planting. The Mishnah stated, if a fence has in it 10 stones, the measure of a fence is 10 tefachim. That, by the way, 10 tefachim is this magic number, and we know that the divine presence hovered at least 10 tefachim above the ground, and that's where the divine presence was located at in the snare in the burning bush, and that it was basically 10 tefachim high. And also we know that the Aron HaKodesh is 10 tefachim, and above, right at the top of the lid of the Aron HaKodesh, that's where the Kohanim or whoever's getting these messages from all the stuff with the breastplate and hearing things, that this is where it comes from, is this 10 tefachim high place. So whenever they're hearing commands from Hashem by the ark, it's going to be over there at this 10 tefachim height. So it carries out with walls as well. Now the Gemara is going to cite a Mishnah with Oholos, which is related to this Mishnah, and that's going to be dealing with other types of barriers, right? So we learned in a Mishnah over there in Oholos 14:1, it says a ziz, that's going to be a ledge over a doorway whose bottom is shaped, conveys tuma if it is of any size whatsoever. In other words, when you have a human corpse or certain parts of it and it's going to be under the same roof, the other items are going to become tamei from the corpse. Why? Because tuma comes by the way of the roof. And in the case of this Mishnah, a corpse under a ledge that extended out above a doorway, and the question is going to come whether this specific kind of ledge would convey tuma to items inside the house. And the Mishnah, in fact, rules that a ziz, whose bottom is going to be shaped and planed, is going to convey tuma to the items in the house, regardless of the dimensions. And why would people be making this kind of ledge? It was made to be basically a beautiful entrance. And people would pass through the door and they would look up and they would see the side of it that was shaped, and it was considered an extension of an entranceway. And this would basically count like the roof of the house, and it would convey tuma into it. So that's about the ziz. And then the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say a gizra, whose top was shaped, and a golvless, one with slopes on both of the sides, but not at center, convey tuma only if they are tefach wide. So these are going to be like this, okay? So a gizra is going to be where the top is planed and shaped, and it's going to be used from above to store things on it. And since it's not meant to serve as an entryway, it is not considered an extension of the roof of the house. That's the trick. And therefore, because it's being used as storage and it's not being used as a thing to beautify and extend the roof of the house, it's not going to convey tuma unless it mentions, unless it's going to meet this minimum measure of an ochel. And what is that? That's going to be 1 tefach by 1 tefach. And if it has these dimensions, it's going to convey tuma even to the items inside the house, since the area under the ledge is going to be connected to the area of the house through an entranceway. And what is a golvless? And that's going to be where it's also going to be shaped, and it's going to be used only from above. And the Mishnah is going to be informing us that it is sloped downwards on both sides, but is nevertheless meant to be used from above. So in this case, they're going to convey tuma if they are a tefach wide. So rather than directly citing this continuation of the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to move on to the Amorim, and they're going to discuss something later in the Mishnah to try to clarify what's going on with this. So the discussion starts with a ruling, and Rabbi Chia bar Ba says in this Gemara, one who contracts with his fellow to make a row of building stones without specifying their height must make them for him 4 tefach high, and this is the standard measurement of space. So the idea here, says Rosh Cirilio, is that examples of the measurement of 4 tefachim being used for space include the laws of Oreshus Hayachid, and that's going to be for Shabbat, and it's also going to be invalid shchach. That would also disqualify a sukkah, by the way. A lot of the laws for measurement you can find in the laws for sukkah. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to give another Amara who's going to support the ruling that from this Mishnah that we were just talking about with the ziz in Ochalos 14:1. Rabbi Yossi says the Mishnah in effect said so, for it is stated with regard to what did they say that a ziz conveys tuma if it is of any size whatsoever, regarding a ziz which is higher than the entrance by only 3 rows of building stones, which are 12 tefachim. Now, why did the Mishnah say that the measurement in the rows of stone, since it's anyway stated in the tefachim? And the Gemara continues, says this is to teach us a monetary law that rows of building stones must be made 4 tefachim unless otherwise specified. And the idea here is that if this is going to be lower than 12 tefachim, and if you have a ziz that's going to be more than 12 tefachim above the doorway, it's not meant to beautify the entrance because it's too high for people to have their sight naturally drawn to it. And so since a ziz will not be considered an extension of the roof of the house, it will convey tuma only if it has the dimensions of a tefach by a tefach. So that's going to be the idea there. Now, the Gemara is going to try to qualify and clarify this relationship between this Mishnah that we have here and in Ochalos. So Rabbi Chia bar Ba asked and said, are these measurements of a stone fence in our Mishnah consistent with those measurements of rows of stone that appear in Ochalos? And another Amara is going to answer. Rabbi Hiskia bar Yaakov bar Acha says in the name of Rabbi Yosef bar ben Chanina, these measurements are indeed consistent with those measurements. In other words, there's a connection between here with the size of the quarry stones and also over there with the ziz, where you're going to have an ochalos. And so the Gemara is going to ask that, it's going to imply that it seems to be inconsistent, and then it's going to explain the difference. So it says here, you say the measure of a fence is 10 tefachim, and less than this, it has the laws of a quarry. And here you say like this, that a row of stones is 4 tefachim. So it says, what are we dealing with and considered a minimum fence? And saying if a minimum fence, when there are 2 rows of building stones, we should learn that the measure of a fence is 8 tefachim. And if a minimum fence is when there are 3 building stones, then we should learn that the minimum size of a fence is 12 tefachim. But here we have a fence of 10 tefachim using 4 tefachim rows. How can it be? And Rabbi Yossi is going to answer this, and he's going to say, subtract half a tefach for chiseling on this side, and half a tefach for chiseling on that side, and similarly for the other surface where the stones are joined, and it emerges that the wall of 3 rows of building stones has a height of 10 tefachim. And that's going to be the minimum fence referred to by this Mishnah. So you might wonder, like, if rows are less than 4 tefachim, after they're chiseled and they had, yet to be chiseled in order for the stones to sit on top of each other very well. So how could the Mishnah in Ocholos state that 3 rows of stones in a building measures 12 tefachim? And there are some commentaries that suggest when constructing a building, mortar is going to be placed between the rows of stones. And in these structures, any amount of stones would be chiseled away to make up for the additional mortar. And when constructing a stone fence, the mortar would not be placed between the rows of stones. So the height of the stone fence would be actually reduced by the amount of chiseling. So there's a possibility that in terms of a building or a fence, you're going to be building a little bit differently. You want the building for a building to be more stable and sturdy. And so you're going to be putting mortar between the stones. But on a fence, you might just be putting mortar on the outside of the stones, and that might just be enough. You're not going to necessarily take that extra step to put mortar between the stones, like as if you were building a building. Now, after talking about this minimum requirement for a fence, the Mishnah is going to talk about that if a fence does not meet these standards, it has a law of a quarry, and the law of the quarry is going to be where he may raise this down to 1 tefach from the ground. And again, where you're going to raise this down to 1 tefach of the ground, it's going to be a case where you can't plow with a boulder that's 1 tefach from the ground. And so it's going to be clear that this was used for building and has a law of a quarry, and it was not used for clearing the ground in a tricky way so that you can be planting. Why? Because you have a boulder in the ground and you can't plow across it. Even though it's 1 tefach high, it's still going to prevent the plow from being used. So the Gemara is going to say, if it has less than these standard requirements, it is actually neither a wall and it's not a quarry. And the Mishnah does not mean that it has a law of a quarry generally. Rather, the Mishnah means that it has a law of a quarry only in that its bottom tefach may not be removed. But in all other respects, it's going to be like a quarry. So if you removed this substandard fence of stones that are higher than 1 tefach, even if the fence does not have enough rock to produce 3 rows that would contain this 27 standard stones for a quarry, you can still remove it as long as you are leaving at least 1 stone, at least a tefach off the ground. You can haul this away. So this is really allowing you to disassemble a fence in a certain kind of way and use those fence to repurpose those stones and bring it out for building. But again, these are building stones. So you might have a real use, and you might say, wait a second, the Torah is saying don't plow, don't work the field. But I need to improve my house. And now you're preventing me from building. So now it seems like Sheviis is preventing me from building. I can't get my building stones to use because now it's going to look like it's plowing. The oral law is coming along and saying, no, there's 2 cases. You have a quarry and you have a law for plowing. And again, if you just have a regular stone sitting in the field, you're not allowed to remove it for Sheviis because that really is for plowing. You're preparing the ground for a future year. But the Torah, it allows you to build during Sheviis. There's no problem with that. And so you can open up a quarry, or as it's talking about with this fence, you can repurpose the fence, but you got to leave at least 1 tefach off the ground so that it's clear that this was not being used to really get things ready for Sheviis, and you wanted to enlarge your field and make it easier and get rid of the fence, that you're really showing an intention that you were using these stones for building. So the Gemara is going to cite a brisa that's going to qualify this Mishnah's rule that one may not take the bottom tefach of stones from a quarry and from a substandard fence. In other words, even if you have this open quarry, you got to leave these bottom stones on there that's at least a tefach from the ground, because again, you need to signify to everybody that this was being used for building. This is not being used to prepare the ground for a future year. You're allowed to build. You just have to do it in the right way. So it was taught in a Baraisa, and Rabbi Yudah says, in regard to what was this said, and it's going to be when he intended to prepare his field for planting, in addition to using the stones for construction. And that's going to be where he's intending to clear the field for planting, and then they can easily misconstrue it with the intent as being the primary motivation, where it would be violating Sheviis. So therefore, the rabbis are being stringent that where you're going to have this, you're still going to be planting at some point in the future. They're still going to require to leave this bottom tefach in place during Sheviis, so it's clear that you weren't preparing the ground. You were only using this rock for building and construction. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say that, but where he did not intend to prepare his field for planting, then even more than this is permitted to take. In other words, he may take all of the stones from the quarry and a substandard fence, and he doesn't need to leave a tefach. So what would this be? This is going to be where he has no intent of planting at all, and the rabbis are not concerned that others are going to really say, oh, this is really his motivation, and he's trying to play a game with the system. And really, perhaps, he just has a big field with rocks, and this is his parnasah, is to have a quarry, and he never plants there. And everybody in the city and town knows that year after year he's not planting. So why should you forbid this guy from taking the bottom boulders on Sheviis? Because he never plants. And so, again, he's allowed to take it because, again, everybody knows that he doesn't take this for planting at all. In other words, in the 8th year, there's not going to be any fields that are planted. And there weren't any fields that were planted in previous years. And, in the 9th, 10th, 11th year, there's not going to be fields either. This is just what the guy does for parnasah. He has a big quarry. So why should you prevent him from selling those stones on Sheviis? There's no prohibition for selling stones on Sheviis, and there's no prohibition for using stones on construction in Sheviis. And certainly, if it's only a use for a quarry, and there's never any field production, it's not a farm at all, it's just a quarry, why would Sheviis stop him from selling the stones? Because he never uses it for planting in a field anyway. And that's basically what it's saying. So the Gemara is going to give another opinion. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, in regard to what is this said, it said when he did not intend to prepare his field for planting at all. But if he did intend to plant the field for planting in addition to using the stones for construction, then even less than this amount is forbidden to take, and he may not take any of the stones from the quarry and the substandard fence. So if he does not intend to plant at all, and this is really just being used as a quarry, okay, then nobody's going to be suspecting him of violating Sheviis. So the rabbis are happy to let him take the bottom stone because, again, Sheviis does not let you, Sheviis stops you from preparing the field on the 7th year. It doesn't stop you from building a house and doing construction and doing stuff with masonry things. It doesn't stop you from that. And so this is something that everybody agrees there's no problem with, and there's no Marasign problem here either. And it should not at all get in the way of this guy's parnasah. Okay, it shouldn't interfere with his parnasah at all. The problem comes where you have this second intent of planting, he says. That's the problem. And then the rabbis are going to forbid him from taking any of the stones from quarry, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, even if he has these 3 exposed rows of 27 stones or from a substandard fence. And why? Because people are going to be concerned that they're going to confuse this secondary intent with the primary one. In other words, they're saying that they want to make sure that people don't confuse it, so they're not going to let you take any stones at all. And the Amorim are going to rule on this issue, and Rabbi Bivi says that Rabbi Yasa ruled in accordance with this brisa, following the lenient opinion of Rabbi Yudah. In other words, that the Gemara is concluding, and it's going to say that it's not going to go by Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who's going to prevent you from taking any stones at all. They're going to say that if you have a secondary intention to plant, that you have to leave at least a tefach in place, both for a quarry or a substandard fence that you're dismantling. And that, by the way, is only going to apply where you have this secondary intent to plant. Now, if you are only using this for a quarry, and there's, again, nobody is thinking that you're going to be planting at all, you never did plant, it's not set up for a farm, it's not set up for a field, it's only set up for masonry things, why should Sheviis come and interrupt his parnasah? So over there, you're allowed to take that tefach of rock from the ground, you can take it away, no problem. But if you have this secondary intention where you're doing this and that, then you got to leave this tefach thing in the ground, because you have to demonstrate to everybody that, look, this was used for construction, and you see I can't get a plow across this land because these boulders are all in the way. And that's the point. Now, in Halacha 5, we're going to talk about when rocks can be removed from a field during Sheviis. That's going to be more complicated. Anyway, have a great day. Thank you.